parents didn't pay for my college, and now they want me to lend them money to pay for my sister's wedding. But I reminded them how they were against borrowing when I needed it. I'm 34 years old and work as a software developer. Compared to the rest of my family, I earn a lot more money. My mom is a retired music teacher, and my dad runs a local hardware store. I also have a younger sister, Catherine, who's 30, and I haven't been in touch with her for the past 5 years. Mainly because she's a horrible person, spoiled and coddled since childhood, and my parents never did anything to curb that. I put up with her for a long time, but 5 years ago she brought her new boyfriend to our Christmas dinner. I was hosting that year. I had just moved into a new apartment and wanted to do something special. But, as always, Catherine ruined the whole party by making unnecessary comments about how small and outdated my place was, and that it wasn't even in a good neighborhood. She wouldn't stop bragging about her new boyfriend, who turned out to be pretty rich and lived in a mansion that was more than 10 times the size of my apartment. I couldn't stand it, so I told her that, unlike her boyfriend, I had moved into this apartment on my own and was paying the entire rent by myself, something she and her boyfriend couldn't say. I also told her that if her standards were so high, she should get out of my house and never come back. Naturally, she and her boyfriend were offended, because it was all true, and they left. Since then, we haven't been in touch, and my parents have made a lot of efforts to reconcile us. But I don't want anything to do with her. Fast forward to recently, I found out that she got engaged to that same guy from 5 years ago, and they're set to get married in a few months. My parents, like fools, insisted on covering the cost of the venue and the wedding decorations because they didn't want to look bad compared to the groom's parents. I think that was a pretty stupid move on their part because, first of all, they should have known that their daughter has expensive tastes and that the wedding would be way over their budget. Secondly, there was literally no way to compete with the groom's parents, who are much more financially stable than our family. I don't even know what they were thinking, but the engagement was already on, and the wedding was only months away, at least according to my sister's plans. My parents eventually realized they couldn't afford it, since my sister's wedding plans were way out of their budget. A few days ago, they came to me asking for a loan. Even though we've had a decent relationship over the past few years, I had to turn them down because of something that happened years ago. The reason I'm on Reddit asking if I did the right thing is that many relatives have told me I'm being stingy, and I really don't believe I am. When I was about to graduate high school and start college, my parents told me they wouldn't cover my tuition or any other expenses because, once I turned 18, I was on my own. I was a bit surprised because they'd always been very supportive, so it seemed out of character. But they explained that in their day, once you hit 18, you had to fend for yourself since their parents couldn't afford to cover their expenses once they became adults. Apparently, that made them very strong and independent, and they wanted me to do the same. They hadn't even set aside any money for my sister or me. They expected us to work through college, just like they did. My major wasn't easy, and I really didn't want to waste my time working while studying because I wasn't sure I could keep up my grades. College isn't cheap. It's pretty expensive, so no amount of effort would have been enough. I suggested that maybe we could take out a student loan for me, but my parents disagreed. Even when I proposed that we could borrow money from some relatives and pay them back later, they said it was insulting just to suggest it. They said asking for money was against their principles because it was pathetic. I remember having many arguments with them about this very issue. In the end, I managed to get my grandparents to help me secure a student loan, and that's how I graduated. I was really angry with my parents at that time for this whole thing. But that doesn't mean I've completely forgotten it. My sister never had that problem because she never even went to college. She figured she didn't need to worry about it since she knew she'd eventually take over dad's business or just get married. And that's exactly what she's doing. So, good for her. Anyway, the point is, I remember what my parents said about borrowing money when I mentioned that we could have taken out a loan for my college expenses. They said no because it went against their principles. So now, According to those same principles, they should still be against borrowing money. When it came to my college funds, all they cared about were their principles. But now that Catherine wants to get married and have a big wedding, suddenly they've forgotten all about that. I thought it was very convenient for them, and I wasn't going to let it slide after all the trouble they caused me back then. I really don't believe that my sister's wedding is more important than my college education. If I hadn't been able to finish my degree and get the grades I did, I probably wouldn't have this job, and I might not even be in a position to help them financially. So when they came to me for help, I reminded them what they had told me about loans and borrowing money, and how it went against their principles. They were a bit stunned. I don't think they expected me to remember all that even after all these years, but I remembered it quite well. After I talked to them, they had nothing to say and just went home in silence. I thought that would be the end of it, but then a bunch of relatives started contacting me, saying that the way I treated my parents was extremely humiliating for them and that they were very upset. Apparently, my parents had told everyone that I changed after making so much money, and now I was paying them back by putting them in their place, trying to look down on them even after everything they had done for me. I don't think that's an accurate representation of what I did at all. I was simply fighting against something that seemed unfair to me. And that was it. So I ended up not speaking to my parents at all, because if they really had a problem with what I said, they should have confronted me right then and there instead of going behind my back and complaining to the rest of the family. I didn't even talk to the rest of the family because if they didn't understand where I was coming from, I had nothing more to say to them anyway. It's not like I was invited to my sister's wedding, so I didn't think I needed to contribute in any way. Over the last few days, I haven't had any contact with my parents or anyone else in the family, and I've been pretty content with that because I don't believe I did anything wrong. But 2 days ago, my parents visited me again, and this time they were very upset. They told me that, apparently because of me, they had been uninvited from my sister's wedding. I don't understand how I could have done something like that, as I haven't been in touch with Catherine at all. But they said that when they told her they couldn't finance the wedding and that they needed some help from her and her in-laws to cover the costs they couldn't pay, she lost it and started pressuring them to somehow get the money. At that point, if she were to ask her in-laws for financial help, it would make her family look really bad, and she didn't want that. She had a point, because if my parents weren't sure they could cover the entire cost of what they'd promised, they shouldn't have committed in the first place. Normally, Catherine is very spoiled and has a sense of superiority, but I don't think she was wrong in what she said here. Personally, I believe that she and her fiancé should have covered the entire cost between themselves, since her family is rich enough to pay for it. But if my parents have committed to something, they should follow through, and she has a point that they're making her look bad in front of her in-laws. I'd say she had every right to be angry, and I told my parents that I wasn't involved in any of it because I never told them to commit to something like that. They brought it on themselves, especially since they didn't have anyone else to blame for it, a part of it being their own fault. At this point, I would definitely say that completely uninviting them from the wedding was an overreaction on my sister's part, but then again, what did you expect? Catering has always been like that, and they're responsible for it, not me. However, my parents just weren't ready to listen and kept insisting that if I had just helped them out and lent them some money instead of being so stingy and harboring old grudges, they wouldn't be in this situation right now. It seemed very unfair to me that they were blaming me, so I asked them to leave, and they did. But they kept badgering me, and now the entire family has turned against me, accusing me of being a selfish and cold-hearted person. Personally, I don't think I did anything wrong, but anyway, I'm now seen as the bad guy simply because I refused to contribute to my sister's wedding since my parents can't pay for it. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, new stories every day. Update 1. So I've decided to cut off all contact with my entire family. The crazy thing is that both my dad's side and my mom's side are united against me right now, except my grandparents. Obviously, my maternal grandparents are no longer around, but my dad's side is on my side. They've even been trying to keep the peace in the family, but even they are getting tired of all this drama. Everyone in the family has had their differences in the past, but I guess their hatred toward me has brought them together. At least I'm glad I managed to do something right for the family, but now I've blocked everyone, and I really don't want any drama at the moment. Someone in the comments suggested that maybe the real reason everyone seems to hate me so much, and needs a reason to be against me, is probably because they're jealous, and I think that's a pretty valid point. I don't mean to brag, but I'm a lot better off than most people in my family, and I don't think they could ever handle that. I never followed anyone else's advice growing up, even though most people told me to just get a business degree and take over my dad's business because that was supposed to be the future instead of always being stuck in front of a computer. And guess what? That's exactly how I make my living now. The fact is, I'm much more successful than most of my cousins, and not only are they jealous of me, but their parents also seem to resent me. It just doesn't make any sense because I believe families should be happy for each other's successes and share in that joy, but that's never been the case. Sometimes it really saddens me, but I can't help it. Some people are just like that. I bet my parents are already enjoying that everyone is against me right now, because according to them, I'm the one who uninvited them from my sister's wedding. We haven't spoken since they came by last time to accuse me of ruining their relationship with my sister, which I still don't understand. My grandparents told me they aren't talking to them either, since my grandparents are on my side, which just shows how ungrateful they really are. My grandparents have helped them countless times in the past, yet they still don't seem to remember any of it. That actually makes me pretty happy, because I'm convinced that if I had helped them when they came to me, they would have conveniently forgotten about it later. They take everything for granted, and it's high time someone gave them a lesson, even if that someone has to be as terrible as Catherine. Update 2. Yesterday, something really odd happened. I was super busy and couldn't share it here, but Catherine came by after I got home from work. She arrived at my place about an hour later, and I was really surprised, because, as I mentioned, I haven't spoken to her in the last 5 years and we're not on good terms. I was pretty sure she was there to talk about her wedding, since now that our parents aren't even invited, I figured she needed money. But she was smart enough not to start with that. Instead, she said she was there to apologize for everything she did in the past. She explained that she was about to start a new chapter in her life by getting married and wanted to extend a formal invitation to me before anyone else to make up for her previous behavior. She claimed that she really regretted being a spoiled kid, but it wasn't entirely her fault because our parents never corrected her behavior either. She grew up believing that what she was doing was normal and acceptable, but now that she's older, she realizes she was a terrible person and is trying to make amends with everyone she hurt. She thought there was no one better than me to start with, since, as her brother, I had to put up with her more than anyone else. I let her speak, and once she finished her little speech, I told her I was okay with it and that I was glad she'd finally come to her senses and apologized. But I knew there was more coming, and I waited patiently. Sure enough, she then started telling me that she knew our parents had also been horrible to me, because she'd heard from other relatives that I was selfish, cold-hearted, and stingy just because I refused to contribute to her wedding. She even tried to flatter me, saying I was totally right in what I'd said, since at the end of the day, they never helped me once I turned 18 and were the ones who had committed to helping her pay for the wedding. So it wasn't my responsibility to bail them out when they were in trouble, especially considering that we never had a good relationship in the first place. I could tell she was gearing up to ask for something, so I just waited until she finally said it. After a while of silence, she finally told me that now that our parents were no longer invited, they had pulled the funds they'd promised for a long time. She went off about how unfair that was, because they were the ones who said they'd cover at least some of the costs, and now she was too embarrassed to go to her fiancé and tell him that, after the fight with their parents, nothing would be covered and that he'd have to pay for everything. So she was here to ask if I'd be willing to help her out in this tough time, just this one time, and that she'd be grateful for it. She even said she was willing to sign a contract or whatever was necessary to prove she'd pay me back eventually. Hopefully by the end of the year. But she just needed my help right then to save her from having to explain everything to her fiancé. I thought it was interesting that she was willing to promise to pay back the money, even going as far as involving legal documents to make it official. But I told her I needed time to think about it. In the end, even though she'd apologized, we're still not on good terms, and our relationship remains very tense. I figured she'd understand, but it turned out she was pretty shameless and said I was being really stingy and that it wasn't much to ask for from her own brother. That was pretty ironic coming from her, since in the past 5 years we haven't had any kind of relationship, not even a sisterly one. I knew from the start that she was only here to ask for money, not to apologize. I told her she was just like our parents, selfish and always looking out for themselves. Obviously, she got mad at me after that and started yelling, but I'm not my parents. I wasn't going to put up with that. I immediately told her to leave my house because I wasn't going to tolerate that kind of behavior. At first, she refused to go, so I grabbed her arm and pulled her out. She kept saying she was going to call the police for assaulting her, but I didn't care. Eventually, she left. I was pretty upset for a while, but now this is just a stupidly funny incident to me, and I'm not going to let it affect me. Update 3. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and I just assumed that since my sister and I were at odds, the invitation she had given me was revoked. But today I was pleasantly surprised to receive an invitation to her wedding. I wasn't sure how to take it, so I decided to reach out to her. At first, she didn't respond, but about an hour later she finally called me back. On the phone, she was pretty brief when I thanked her for inviting me, so I asked what was really going on because I was confused. She told me that that day she wanted to apologize and that she was really trying to be a better person. She also said that she'd managed to secure the money on her own, so she didn't need anyone's help anymore. But she wanted me to know that she wasn't just apologizing to win me over for my money. She truly meant every word she'd said that day. She also mentioned that our parents actually made her realize just how spoiled she had been in the past, and now she's doing her best not to become like them. At that point, I asked if she was planning on inviting our parents too, and she said that, contrary to what people are saying, she never really uninvited them. Instead, they put themselves in a really difficult position. Apparently, our parents had been warned from the start about the extravagant wedding plans she had, and they were told that they probably wouldn't have enough to cover everything. But they were overly confident about it. After talking so big, it would have been pretty embarrassing for her to tell her fiancé that her parents could only talk big and couldn't actually pay what they promised. What really upset her was that they didn't even bother to think things through, and they were so determined to compete with her in-laws that, after she ended up yelling at them, they decided on their own that they no longer wanted to be part of her wedding. They never even had it out with her, but they came to that conclusion on their own, and now they're doing exactly the same thing to me instead of confronting her directly. They've been talking to everyone about it. I have to admit, it's really twisted that they're telling people their kids are so awful when they don't even try to clear things up with us when they have the chance. Of course, after saying such horrible things about us to everyone else, we're not exactly eager to patch things up with them. And yet, they always find a way to blame us. They just love playing the victim. I'm glad that my sister is finally seeing that for herself. Catherine told me that the rest of the family hasn't completely cut her off like they did with me, but she's still debating whether to invite them because they seem pretty certain to side with our parents. With me, they were really mean, but with her, most of them still tried to explain why our parents were right instead of directly accusing her of anything. I suspect it might have something to do with our parents being too proud to apologize but not too proud to live off their children in the future. And since our grandparents aren't going to help them anymore, at least they need Catherine on their side to keep that door open. That's just my theory, though I'm not sure what's really going on. What I do know is that they're treating Catherine very differently from how they treated me, and it's sad, but it's not something I'm not used to. At least Catherine is starting to see the truth now, and if she's really trying to be a better person, I think I'm willing to give her a chance. After we talked on the phone, she apologized for causing a scene the other day and said she'd really be happy to have me at the wedding, because at least one family member should be there. I still haven't decided whether I want to go or not, but I'm going to wait a few days before getting back to her about attending. It's not easy to fix a relationship that's been broken for 5 years, but I also don't want to be the type of person who holds grudges forever. Life would be miserable if that were the case. I even talked it over with our grandparents, and they said if I decide to go, they'd attend as well. They weren't sure about going before, but given the current circumstances, they might, since it looks like Catherine is reconsidering her relationship with the rest of the family and might not invite them. Update 4. Yesterday I was at Catherine's wedding, or rather, I attended because I walked her down the aisle. Unfortunately, our parents never apologized to her or even reached out before the wedding, which is why they weren't invited. She was really upset about that for a couple of days before the ceremony and contacted me to ask if I'd be willing to walk her down the aisle, as she needed someone there for immediate emotional support. I agreed, because no matter what happened in the past, no one deserves to be treated like that, especially not by their own parents over some trivial fight. I've always known it would be much easier for our parents to distance themselves from me, since my sister was always the golden child. But witnessing this side of them made me realize they were too proud and selfish to even try to mend their relationship with the only daughter who ever really mattered to them. That was just beneath them. They're partly the reason Catherine turned out the way she did in the past. Nobody ever bothered to correct her behavior as parents, which should have been their responsibility. They never seemed to care about how she acted and always thought it was a good idea to let her be, which ultimately spoiled her. I'm not saying it's entirely her fault, but they could have done something to prevent it, and they didn't. When Catherine asked me to walk her down the aisle, I said yes. She genuinely seemed grateful because even the few family members she invited ended up declining. I guess everyone wants to support our parents and be part of the drama. However, I managed to convince our grandparents to attend, and she apologized to everyone before the ceremony. Her fiancé even apologized to me for how he treated me all those years ago. Catherine told me she had laid out the whole truth to her fiancé about our parents, and he said not to worry about the money. He'd take care of everything. That's how things worked out for them. She nearly broke down before the ceremony because our parents wouldn't be there, but her fiancé, our grandparents, and I reassured her not to let them ruin such a special day. I wouldn't say everything's perfect now, but we're working on it and trying to make things better in the future. I truly believe she's changed, and when I saw her yesterday, I felt she was sincere about wanting a fresh start. Some people might not agree with my decision, but I think I'm doing the right thing. Update 5. I'm back after more than a year, or maybe even 2. I can't quite recall my last update, but I have some really good news about my sister. She became a mom a month ago. She had her daughter. Thinking back on everything we went through with our parents at her wedding, I remembered this post. Neither of us has spoken to our parents since. They haven't even met their granddaughter. The only ones who have gone to see her are our grandparents, who are now great-grandparents. I wish this were a happy update in the sense that things have improved with our parents, but they haven't. We've made peace with the fact that our parents aren't in our lives, and that's how we live now. I don't even think an apology from them would help at this point, because over all this time they haven't even tried to come close to fixing things. But it's okay. Some people grow up without parents and still do just fine. When it comes time for me to be a parent, I'll definitely take everything I experienced with them into account and use it to be a better father. I think that's the least I owe my future children, and my niece, as her uncle.